This is a CC for our good friend Joe. After talking with him, we know his main areas of concern are his composition, feeling like he's not quite nailing down his like wide images and like even sometimes on his mid type shots, in addition to just double checking his editing and making sure like things aren't getting too warm and it's like, you know, best it can be kind of thing. So let's dive into those photos. All right, so first up we have one that he marked as good. I'm gonna look through the raw photos first, just so we can see what we're like actually working from before we look at the edited images. So let's start with this one because we've got first up, feels like it's good. Second one, so on. All right, I actually disagree with his rating here. So I feel like this is a stronger, like compositionally stronger image than this one is. And now let me tell you why that is. So this first image, we actually have some good leading lines, like threefold, right? They're pretty well on that third. Like this is just a real quick straighten, that type of thing. Now I can see why he's like iffy on it because of the lens that it was on. Let me get in here. There we go. Okay. Because he is on that 24 to 70, he's at a wider angle. It's going to have like a little bit of that distortion that we need to watch out for, that type of thing. So you can see these vertical lines are leaning back. We could probably use a little bit more foot room on it, those types of things. But like as a whole, this one is stronger because like I said, we are on a third. And then we also have like some nice leading lines, and we also have framing in that image, which all kind of like ties your eye, like draws your eye into your subjects, right? These are all really good things. This one, on the other hand, although we were hitting pretty close to that third with that family, like would be right about where we need to be, we have some distracting things happening in that background. And we even have like a little bit of distraction in our lights since they are in the shadow, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but my eye wants to go to this bright spot first rather than my subjects. So I see his intention and his thought process here, right? I can see that like we saw this pathway, like, ooh, draw your eye and frame it. But we also have this business happen here along with the tree trunk, which makes your eye want to go back here or kind of detracts or breaks up the subjects. So we want to try and avoid things that are like directly behind or close to our subjects that will distract you from their actual faces and what is happening in this shot. So I would, for this one, to tweak it a little bit, I would probably, even though there's a trash can here, that's going to be an easy like stamp out. If we can avoid the trash can and use the actual trail and like scooch them back here, obviously not there, I don't know where that trail goes, but if we can scooch them back there and actually use that full leading line, that would make it a much stronger image. Or if we even slid them over here and got this tree out of the shot, I think that would even be a stronger image. Or if the intention of this image is like the family playing together, why not shoot it even tighter or like take different angles from the side of like, let's focus on Leaf and Girl's hand. Let's focus on Mom's face. And then you don't have to worry about that tree that's hanging out back there. So those are all little options that I think would make this a much stronger image. All right, so we already kind of talked about this one. Like I said, it's actually a really solid start. We just need it to have, let me reset it, a little more foot room so we have room to correct. Now, when you're on those wider angle lenses or you're using them at a wider angle, you need to remember that you're probably going to have a little bit of a tilt. So you either got to kind of compensate in the moment and tilt the camera forward, like, shoot, if that makes sense. So you're kicking your lines back towards you, or you just need to leave a little bit of space for post so that way you can straighten it up a little bit. Because when we start to do this, let me get it into our range again, and then go down here. So we can start to tip those lines forward, right? And that's already looking a lot cleaner. But as we do that, it's going to change our like foot room and stuff. And we want to make sure we leave enough room for feet, especially if they want to frame it or put it on a canvas, stuff like that. So whenever I am shooting on those like wider angle lenses, I'm still going to honor my like half as much foot room to headroom ratio the best I can. But I'm going to push to the subjects a little more center than I usually would to give myself that little bit of flexibility and make sure that my subject isn't hitting anywhere where I may get like that barrel distortion or anything like that on my like actual subject. So that's just one thing on this one that would help it take it like one step further, give it a little bit more space so that way we can like correct and like make sure we've got really nice good straight lines. Okay, so this one and this one and this one he all feels good about, and I think we're at a really good start on these images. I would just like to see a little bit more. So for me, this one, like with this lens, he's on a crop sensor, so 51 isn't actually 51 millimeters. It's going to be more like closer to what would be a 70, if I remember correctly, on like your typical non-cropped crop sensor cameras. So for me, when I see that, I am actually looking for the composition to be more like this. You know what I mean? Just because like that's what that you know, focal length lends your eye to look for. So I would instead take this to a much wider angle and instead like really lean into that wide, like open, like that wide look, if that makes sense. So when you shoot at like a 24 on a 24 millimeter or anything like that, you're going to start to get that like wraparound. And that's what I'm looking for. I want the like natural lens curve to bring that subject to me and then let the background kind of like wrap around behind them. And it's a really interesting and cool effect. This is the pose to be doing it in. And we've got some nice leading lines into them, all that stuff, but we could further emphasize it by taking a slightly higher angle to our subject so you can see that line moving in, shooting it at a wider angle to bring the subject forward and let it wrap around. And then when you're doing that type of thing, you just really want to make sure that you're getting your, again, subjects closer to that middle so they're not catching anywhere on the lens that'll cause them to distort funny. And then just be aware, like super aware of your angles, because at like a 24, a 35, whatever, they tend to like, they're not the most flattering like focal length for your subject. So you just need to make sure when you're doing that, that you're like doing everything you can posing wise, the, you know, height at which you're shooting to help flatter your couple still. So just a few things to keep in mind, but I feel like doing that would give it a much stronger and like more interesting appearance. On this guy as well, same spot, same couple. He's using the leading lines here, but I think we could take it one step further. Depending on what we have on like this side or this side, it may be better to shoot this at like an off to the side and have the subject on the third. So you see that road like lead through this, or like horizontally, like him perpendicular to the road kind of thing. And that would give you like a little bit more interesting of an angle, more interesting of a shot, or back up further from the subject and get a little bit lower so you can have that line really lead into them. Now, with that kind of technique, you can only do that for so long before the couple gets too close and you're like shooting up their nose. But as long as you can get far enough back that your angle to your subject isn't like this, it's more subtle like that. It's still a good technique that works well when you're, you know, incorporating leading lines. Or like I said, shoot it off to the side or perpendicular to the road and allow it to kind of lead through. So from like third, put the couple on the third, let the line kind of vanish out of frame, if that makes sense. Okay, so this guy, we're close. This is another one that I would like to see. So we're at 24, which is good for this particular case. But this is another one I would like to see a more interesting crop, because right now where it's at, I want to see the trees, right? I'm looking for the treetops. But here's something that we didn't like. I've looked through this before and went over this. So this is actually a really interesting composition that he didn't notice. I didn't catch it first until I started fiddling with it. I'm like, this would have been the much cooler shot. So just always when you're like shooting, try a little bit of different angle, try a couple different compositions with every shot that you're taking, so you can kind of experiment and start to feel out what actually looks best for each scenario. And we have this really interesting effect of like reflection of the trees really nicely framing our subjects. And I think that makes it like tenfold more powerful or impactful of an image. Okay. Now we're going to get into the dirty. So this one is what we were referred to. This is what we were referring to as this shame image. We've got a lot going on here. Okay. So first of all, we're going to talk about the lighting. So the reason why this looks so like dark and kind of spooky and rather drab is because we're not letting in enough ambient light into this image. So that means, yes, although our subject is well lit, no light is getting back here. So whenever you're in this kind of situation, especially if you've only got one flash or you don't have backlight or anything like that, because you could still shoot it like this and stick a backlight behind them and get like at least a nice looking light to your subjects back behind, or like do a catch light, whatever. Or you could even use a background light and light up the house behind them. But you're working too hard, right? This can easily be done with one flash. You just need to let in more light overall, because when we let in more light overall, we don't have to pump our flash like quite so much, which means we won't have as harsh of shadows on our subjects. Now this one, it's always going to look a little bit funky because I'm not sure how well you guys can see it, but the door is actually in focus, not our subjects. So we need to do stuff in like post-production to correct for that sort of thing. But let me show you real quick what would happen. So if we lifted this up to here, do you already see how much lighter? Had we exposed for, let me do my math real quick. So if we were at 1600 ISO, which this camera can handle, so one more stop of light would be 800 right there. And then one more stop of light would be right here. So you can see how like brightening it up that much will brighten up that background a whole lot. Ignore the subject, right? Look at your background. This is more the level of exposure we would want from that background. Now, obviously we have this little, it's like a tombstone, it's kind of freaky thing hanging out in here. We're gonna have to stamp that out in post-production. In the moment, obviously try to avoid these types of things. either scooting the subject back towards the doorway would avoid it, you getting past this, whatever it may be. Or if you're like super stuck with it, if you enter the situation of like, oh God, this is where I have to take it, this is what I'm doing, always make sure this kind of thing is positioned in an area that is really easy to stamp out. And this one is. So we can literally just grab grass from here, paste it over. It's not the end of the world. It's distracting now, but it won't be in the long run. All right. And then one more thing on this one as well. I think we missed the opportunity, kind of what we're talking about, taking a higher angle to let these lines lead into our subjects, but also like further lean into that framing of the doorway. And let's focus on the like quasi creepy house behind him, but more about the like framing element of it. So I think doing all those little things would turn this like meh photo into like a really strong image. So letting more light in through your camera settings, so shooting it at an ISO of 1600 would mean you have to use less flash power, which means we have less harsh of lighting on the subject, which means less harsh shadows occurring, which means we can also see the house behind them. Like there's so many things by just changing that one camera setting that will like wildly benefit this image. Okay, so like I said, Joe and I talked, this is his shame image. Moving on. Okay, so these two are interesting because this is the same shoot, same location, but Joe feels like his tighter shot is a stronger image than his wider shot. Now, in the moment, there's a couple of things that we could do to make this a little bit better. This statue behind becomes a bit distracting, right? Because it's growing out of her. And it's kind of like panels, brick, that sort of thing are a little complicated, or kind of a pain in the butt to like stamp out in post, right? So right now, it's just that our subject isn't, although we're at a 2.8 and she's not against this background, that background is so busy that it becomes kind of a distraction and we don't have anything good to draw our eye into our subject. So maybe this would be a case of like, back up, let the sidewalk lead into her. Now, depending on the sidewalk, I think it curves a little bit. So getting exactly square may be a little bit tricky, but maybe instead you're using like that line off from like one side this way to lead into your subject in that manner. Maybe you get a like back up, get a little bit lower, that type of thing. There's little tweaks in the moment that would bring your eye more into your subject for this kind of shot. But there's also stuff we can do in post-production that like draws your eye more into that subject. Okay, these last two, he wasn't a big fan of either one of these images. I actually think we're pretty close. So what gets me on this one is, although we have like nice leading lines, right? These are all good things. It's all this little background clutter and distractions here, right? That start to draw away from your image. So if you're in this place, like let's say this is our best option for this scenario, instead maybe turning and using this as your background so it like vanishes instead of showing off this area, shoot into this leading line or move them closer, those types of things. So that way your background becomes like vanishing line of pillars. If lighting or whatever wasn't quite right to be doing that, then this really isn't the worst. I would take maybe just a slightly higher angle to the subject, just so his head falls like right in here. But right now it's at a decent spot. We don't have anything directly like cutting into their heads, which is good. Makes our life easier in post-production, because I think all of this stuff that makes this photo like, yes, we would rather fix it in the moment, but we can actually clean this up in post without spending a ton of time. So same thing on this one. Like, I actually think we're really close. This kind of pose and everything calls, like, to me, it makes me want it to be more on a third, because she is looking strongly in a direction. And we even have like lines drawing you into them. So I think if this had been like, if they were over here a little bit, or more of his angle, like if he came from like this side into them a little bit more, would have been a stronger composition for this particular shot. Posing wise, we're a little awkward as far as like arm placement goes. And if it's not a good reach around, like if it's hard for the guy to like reach around the girl, it could get like kind of awkwardly wrapped. So that's why I always take this kind of shot, instead of being like directly in front of her, angle their bodies so that way it's a little bit more from the side, and it'll make it less awkward looking. It'll make it look a little less awkward for the arms. Or if this doesn't fully work, you can always set it like shift this pose, change his placement here, and instead have him place her hand on her like bicep. This arm goes down to the side for her, whatever it may be. It still gets the same effect of being like wrapped up and she's in front kind of shot without having to do the like full reach around. We can go over posing and stuff later as far as that goes, but the actual shot is, like I said, I feel like we're really pretty close. So let's look at his edits for each of these images. All right, so we've got a mix of good and bad going on here. Now, Joe's concern is getting too warm on some of them, and a few of these, I feel like, yes, we may have gotten just like a little too far on like the yellow greens, just because it's starting to look like too stained in their skin, if that makes sense. So this one, I think we're really pretty close. It's really white balance is subjective, I feel like, as long as skin looks good and whites still are white and not turning blue or yellow or anything like that. But I am actually going to just soften this slightly. And so I'm not jacking with all of his stuff. I'm just going to use dehaze. In the reverse, I'm going to cool it maybe just a smidge and make them slightly pinker. So we're going from, to import this to this, which is such a subtle change. But the big change is going to be this. So to eliminate this distraction, that change of lighting, I'm just going to darken it. Use a linear gradient. So M is your quick key for that. Come in here to your exposure. O to kick off that red business so you can see what's going on. And literally just darken that. And you already see like so much, like it makes it so much cleaner and such a simple thing. Okay. And then we can even go so far as like, if we feel like in these background and the shadows, it's getting a little bit too dark, we can use this, go in here, and we can just lift our shadows a little bit. And then what I'm going to do, because I want to still maintain a good direction of light and separating them from the background, I'm going to use my radial gradient. So shift in for that quick key. I make sure it's nice and feathered because I want those shadows, that like darkened area, to slightly touch my subject so it looks nice and natural. We're going to invert that and we're going to draw that line there. So you can see I put that down so I could tweak my shadows just in that area, right? So it didn't turn to like dark, creepy forest behind them. We can still kind of see what's going on back there, but I don't want to push it too far. Otherwise we'll get like some weird grain happening. Okay. Then last but not least, let's just remove this distraction here. So Q is your quick key for that. And I think my erase version is going to do it. If not, we'll just use heal or stamp, whatever. Okay. Let's see what we got. Oh, we're so close. Okay, let me zoom out. I'm going to select this area for it to pull from. So command and drag your square to choose where that eraser is drawing from. And let's see if this gets it. There we go. Yeah. Okay. Ta-da! And if they didn't know to look there for that, then I don't think they'd ever see it. So you can see we didn't do a whole lot of work, but we took it from this to this, which gives it just a much cleaner look. Okay. Now this guy here, I think we're getting just like a smidge too contrasty on it, and we're a little bit too warm because if you remember the original, let me click up this. You can see this is like actually close to white, and now we're pink. So this is when we start to cross into the line of like, we've taken this like a little too far. So we're going to go in here and let's just start tweaking our white balance a little bit. Clean that up. There we go already. Okay. And then again, I'm not going to do anything crazy to his edit, but I am going to just like soften it a little bit. We can even take back a little bit of contrast. I don't want to lift those shadows. Or let me see. Yeah, I'm going to kick off this tone curve on this one because it is giving it too much. Okay, let me see. 2 shakes here. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay. And then same thing on this one. Okay, so I know we kind of talked about straightening it and, you know, cleaning up those vertical lines a bit. Realistically, I would have liked it shot in this realm for like the amount of headroom or somewhere around those lines. If that, like in that realm of space. And then let's go ahead and straighten it. The reason why we can't do that now is like there's literally just not the room for it. We go here, and then we would just subtly straighten it there. Yeah, I feel like this would be much stronger if we had just a little bit less headroom. Okay, so then we're gonna go just a little bit, shift in for that radial gradient. Oh, it's already there. Oh, he must have already put it on there. Ha! I was like, wait, I didn't put that there. What's that doing there? Joe. Okay, so we need to make sure that if we're using that to draw our eye into the subjects, we are feathering it. And then I'm just going to change make it just be the exposure. There we go. And then we're going to bring that down like so to kind of draw your eye into your subjects naturally. It's nothing crazy, just a very subtle linear gradient. So you can see this one, kind of a big change from here into here. So still, if you look at their skin, or her skin in particular, you can still see we're like nice and warm, but we've kind of toned it back just to be slightly less intense. Okay, this one, I feel like we're really pretty close. Joe likes to edit just slightly more vibrant than I do, which is totally fine. You do you. But I'm going to soften it just a smidge because there does become a point when it's like, ooh, that's a bit intense, right? And we're just like, we're toning that line. So I'm just going to tone it down like the littlest bit here for him. Okay. And then I do want some color in their skin still. 2 shakes there. Okay. And then I'm going to use Shift M And again, I'm going to use that radial gradient to draw our eyes into our subjects here. And you can see already how much that separates them from the background. Okay, and then another thing you can do with radial gradients, and the reason why I do this with radial gradients versus just like masking out his face, is if you notice, because like he's already a darker skin tone than she is, and he's also in the shadows, so if he starts to get a little bit too dark, we can use another radial gradient to focus on him. So instead of putting this light here, I'm going to shift it more here. So we contour that side of her face, give her a little bit of shadow there. And then I'm going to make another one that will not inverting. So right here, I'm going to make sure it's 100% feathered. And I'm going to subtly add light to his face. And I want it to be a radial gradient and not his face selected, because I want it to look natural. And because it is a radial gradient and it's going to slightly feather and dissipate, it's going to create that like false, fall off of light that you would have naturally, rather than, it's not like, unless you're like sticking your face like in a snoot, there's no way it's not going to spill like slightly on you. So right around there gives him just a little bit more light. So like I said, this was a real subtle adjustment of there into here, where we've very minimally changed the actual edit itself. We've just refocused our lighting. All right, so the same thing on this one. Just tone it down. Like this one isn't even as intense as the other one, just like a very subtle tone down. And then all you got to do, I would honestly darken this background just because it is pretty bright. So I'm just going to go subtly there. And then if we wanted to come in and do an additional radial gradient, we sure can. So make sure, again, we are nice and feathered. And angle it like so, and voila. So you can see we took it from here, which is still a nice image, to here, which looks much more professional, much more refined. All right, so then this one, let's actually do the crop we were talking about. So taking it from this, I'm going to bring it to here-ish, and then I'm going to bring it to here, so we get that nice effect of lake behind them. Make sure they're nice and centered there. I would rather it be more like probably that framing wise, but I also don't necessarily enjoy having that wood in this shot. I think it takes away from it. So I'm going to crop it more like this, just because it's going to be easier to remove this little streak than like a whole chunk of wood would be. And really, like, color, we're not too intense or anything like that. I'm going to cool it like the teensiest bit. And then we're going to refine his radial gradient and make it much more feathered. So we're going to go to make sure it's just on exposure. We're going to really feather that sucker so that light falls on them nicely. Like so, and then somewhere in that range, because we still have all that beautiful detail. I'm going to make that background, though, I want that water to be bluer a little bit. Just a little bit bluer, give it a little more color back there, especially since we have some nice leaves and everything happening. So let's just go into here, and we're going to change the temperature. You can already see, and sometimes that's how you like, if you like to edit with stronger, like warmer tones on the skin, but you notice it looks like overall too warm or a little too like saturated, by making your background cooler, especially if you've got like water or sky, it's going to fall. So it's going to trick your eyes into thinking the overall image is cooled down rather than changing, the look of your skin. So that's a little trick for you guys. If you ever notice that's happening in your images, if you're somebody who likes to edit warmer, but then you're like, overall, this looks like too warm. Just cool down that like sky, water, the blues, and it's going to make a huge difference. Okay, so we can even saturate a little bit if you want to really bring out the colors in the leaves. And you see how if we just saturate the background, it becomes more saturated overall, but not intensely so. So again, just little tricks there of like how to trick the eye in photography. Okay, so let me do that. Okay, just to give it a little bit cleaner look, I'm going to take out this bit of wood. Now, because it is actually, there's like more wood below it, it's going to try to match and blend in that chunk. So I'm probably going to have to use the stamp portion rather than like erase or heal. And I'm going to make sure, because we're like right up against her on this first chunk, I'm going to just make sure we are not feathering at all so I can get as close as possible to her. And then we're going to blend the rest in a little bit more nicely. Okay. And now we're going to take out this chunk and we're going to make sure we feather it versus the other one. So let me bring this in. Super feathery, cha-cha-cha, go. I'm going to drag this down just a little bit. And then if I still see a line there, because I am stamping, just because, like I said, the healing option is going to try and blend it in too much without having that that portion already colored the way I want to have it colored. So then I can go in with one of these and start matching it a little bit more. And if some area is being stupid for you, honestly, I just crop it and, you know, que sera, sera. You can also take it into Photoshop, which would be a little bit more efficient in some cases. And this one, if the water's being finicky, you can take it into Photoshop real quick by hitting Command or Control E. I just try to keep it in Lightroom if at all possible, just because once you take it out of Lightroom, it's no longer a raw image. Okay, I'm gonna skip this one. We're gonna circle back to it because that's gonna take a little bit of work. This guy. So I feel like we're just a little intensely green back behind there. So I'm gonna cool it and make it a little bit pinker. And then let me check down here. Okay, so let me kick off this color grading that he put on there, because I think we're hitting a little too strongly in some of these areas. Let me go here. There we go. We're starting to clean up a little bit there. Okay, somewhere in that range I feel like looks a little bit healthier on her. And then again, we can take this to the next level. So just throwing down the radial grades, but we're not quite feathering them enough. So I'm going to shift this to be just exposure oriented. So again, we're not making that background too yellow. And then we're going to feather that. Okay. And then I'm going to drag it up here so it's just hitting her. And then I'm going to mimic the direction of light that is already occurring. And then we're going to start honing that in. Okay. And voila. So we just took it from this, where you can see it gets like a little too dirty, a little too yellow green, to this, which is still a very warm image without being quite so dingy on those whites. Okay, so same thing here. We're just going to cool it a little bit. Make it slightly pinker. All right, and then let's do a little bit of work to make Joe love this photo again, because it's a really similar, same person, same day, same background. So first things first, let's crop her more centered. Right around here, so those eyes are intersecting, and then we've got almost a 2-to-1 ratio, right about there. Okay, so I'm not going to do anything about this guy because it is going to get a little bit complicated to get that out, and I already did this on this image for him. So we would take out here. This museum entrance sign is something you would definitely want to do. Remove that sucker so that's gone from your image. Again, all to make it more interesting. Hit M, and then you're going to select that background. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make that background less in focus, so that way it like really separates it from our subjects. So we're going to darken it, because we're already at this part right around there. Looks natural. You can see, so this is what tripped me up on this image. But because it rained and there's a puddle there, there's like a weird reflection of light. It's not a side thing we're doing. It's in the image. Okay, so I'm going to darken that a bit there, and then I'm going to come in here. Actually, hold on, 2 shakes. And then we're going to come down here, and we're going to take the sharpness, and we're going to take away clarity and maybe some texture, but I think that's going to do it. Yeah, because you don't want to go crazy, right? We don't want to go like way too far back. And the reason why I don't use the like blur thing that they're testing out is because it can't be synced to other images, and it takes a long time to process. So I'm all about the most efficient way to do the job. And this is the most efficient way currently. Okay, so I'm going to invert that. Again, we're keeping it nice and feathered. We're going to choose our direction of light. I want it to look like it's falling from the sky onto her. I'm going to drag this up. I'm going to drag it through the image like so. And then I just want to barely touch her. And then, darken it, and voila. So we took that from an image where we were kind of losing our subject in that background like that, to an image that is now something, right? She really stands out and like much more interesting to look at. We can clearly tell like, hey, here's our subject. And in the future, like take a slightly lower angle to your subject so we can hide this or position her a little bit differently, so that way you can keep that guy out of it. Not a huge deal. Okay, now let's take this one to kind of the next level as well. We're going to hit M. And first of all, I'm going to kick these off so we can see here. I think this one was just to add more light. Yeah, it was just adding more light to the subject. So we can do that like here to start with. So if we want our subjects to be a little bit brighter, we can do that. Honestly, this one isn't overly saturated or anything like that. I'm going to start by, first of all, darkening that background a little bit, because when our subjects get bright enough, then our background gets a little too bright. So somewhere along that range, and then we don't have to worry about making it more out of focus or anything like that. And then Shift M, so we kind of blend it in and it's not a harsh line. So that's why I don't take it all the way. Like if I were to just darken, right, you can 100% tell I just fake darken that in post, and that's not what we want. We want it to look natural still. So we're going to do it with a radial gradient and a background selection. Okay, I want to make sure that that light's falling on both faces. And then we're going to gradually start to darken in this manner. And voila. You can see how much more natural that looks. Okay, then the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to clean up this clutter, because that's going to make a huge difference on like making a less distracting image. pretty dang close. This is the only one. This is the only one. We were so close. Okay. Use the stamp tool in. Bring it in right around here. It's really pretty dang close. Okay. And voila. Okay, you can already see much closer. It is getting a little hot in her hair there. We do have some room. We don't want to like smash our highlights because that'll totally change the look of your image, but we can bring it down a little bit for that hair if we're worried about that. Okay. And this one. So this one compared to that one, especially for if it's the same shoot, want to tone this one down for sure. Okay. So we're going to go here. We're going to cool it. And then we can literally just go in here and soften it like so. And that is already helping a ton. I'm going to tone down that vibrance and saturation a bit. So just like so. We're already getting closer. Okay. And then again, I'm going to kick this guy off just because we're going to do it ourselves. And then let's separate them from the background a little bit. Go. And exposure. Okay. And then Shift M to redirect that light. Make sure it is nice and feathered. Invert it if you didn't already. That is a little too dark. And there we go. Okay. And then if he has darker skin than she does, I would drag it a little bit more to his side just so we keep it, keep more light to his face and don't lose him in the shadows. Okay. And there you go. You can already see like from, let me go here so you can see before. Boom. To here. We are still like a warmer looking image without being like overly warm or saturated. All right, let's dive into this bad boy. So I'm going to start out with sharpening this image because I know right out the gate this is probably going to get grading behind them. Now I try to avoid this if I can, but we're probably got to do it for this one. It just takes a long time and ain't nobody got time for that. Go. So we're just going to let it do its thing. We're going to hang out for a minute. Tra-la-la. Thank you all for hanging out with me. We're waiting for the denoise to process. Let's go.
One eternity later. 3:28 a.m.
Hey! Okay, so we've smoothed that background out a bit so we can start diving into it. I'm going to start from the top then, so always start with your largest adjustments first. Now you can see this, we've crossed into that, like our white balance is starting to get kind of stained, so we're going to ease that off there. And then I'm going to bring those blacks back down because we are like way lifting those, and I don't know that we need to. I'm going to worry less about the clarity in the big adjustments. I'm going to do that more focused on our subject there, and I think somewhere in that range already looks better. I'm going to go ahead and while we're already here, let's just stamp the sucker out. Go Power Rangers, you mighty morphin' Power Rangers. Okay, there we go. Okay, and then to select your background, let's do this. Now this isn't the prettiest house in the world, so it's maybe not the worst thing that it's hidden, but we're gonna go with it. Okay, we're gonna brighten this up. I'm gonna lift the highlights so that those like bright areas get brighter and hopefully clean it up slightly. I'm gonna cool the background down just a teensy bit because it is very dingy looking. And then let's go ahead, and because it is actually sharper than our subjects are, we're going to fake sharpen our subjects by de-sharpening that background, which is going to help us out. Okay, and then let's go ahead. I'm going to brighten this even more because I think I'm still going to do a radial gradient on it. So probably about here because I have got a little bit of room to add light to my subjects. There we go. Okay. I have it set, or I just set it again because I clicked something apparently. So that way when I hit plus and minus on my keyboard, it brightens up my overall image from wherever I'm at. Okay, so then I'm going to straighten this guy a little bit. You can see by removing our little tombstone, it's still gone. I can see the color overall. We've got room to make it slightly less green and warm. Okay, I'm going to invert that. Change the exposure, redirect that light. Angle it like so. I don't want my shadows to get too dark, so I'm going to keep those shadows lifted even though I'm lowering the overall exposure in there to kind of balance it out. And then one last thing for this guy, because our subjects aren't super sharp, I'm going to go in here, select my subjects, and I'm going to add sharpness to them, a little bit of clarity, maybe a little bit of texture, just to help them out a little bit. There's other programs and stuff you can use to further sharpen your images. And then you could up your sharpening, don't go too ham on it. And then in the masking, hold Option, and when you're down here, right, that means it kind of isolates, so you want those hard lines to be nice and sharp to help emphasize without getting to sharpen without it getting too grainy. Okay, And then somewhere along those lines, yeah, we're looking better. Not perfect, but definitely better. But like I said, I think this image probably would have been stronger had we like kept it around that range. Now, because it is already out of focus, we definitely can't afford to punch in that much because it will look like extra out of focus. But if you want to see where we were before and where we had it after, boom. There we are before, and now here we are after. So less pitch black behind them, right? A little bit more detail and a little bit less orangey saturated. Now, if he wants to keep it warmer, we could probably kick it up to here. Whatever your heart desires kind of thing. But that would be the adjustments I would do, like with this current, where it sits now, in our overall look. In the moment, like I said, shoot it a little bit differently so it's not so pitch black behind them. You can still use things like backlight and that sort of thing if you don't want to see the full house, because maybe it's not the prettiest house in the world, but still make it interesting back behind them. Just to give you an idea of stuff to like work on in the future. So for him, really, composition, like he was worried about his foot room, that sort of thing. There was only one image in there where it really felt like we didn't have enough foot room to correct what we needed to correct. I think it's more about finding more interesting angles, like higher angle, that sort of thing. Composing with a little bit more intentionality, thinking through like, okay, this is the safe shot. What could be the next shot that would be a little bit more interesting, more creative? And really his edits were pretty close, just like a little bit too saturated on some of them, but then using those radial gradients to like shape the light and separate them from the background more will really take the editing the next step further.